All right, welcome back and happy Friday. We're going to jump right in where we left off. Yesterday, we left off in Mark chapter 6. We talked about the mission of the 12, and now we're going to jump down to verse 14 Herod's opinion of Jesus. So we're going to start talking about Herod again. King Herod heard about it, for his fame had become widespread, and people were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why mighty powers are at work in him. Others were saying he is Elijah. Still others, he is a prophet like any of the prophets. So, of course, as Jesus begins to reveal himself and show more of his power, they're wondering, who is this guy? And remember, he is Elijah, right? That was one of the prophets who said Elijah will come back to usher in the Messiah. Some say he's just another one of the prophets. We have another prophet in our midst. But when Herod learned of it, he said, It is John whom I beheaded. He has been raised up. Ooh, we haven't heard about John being beheaded yet. We knew he was arrested. So now we get to hear the story. This is how it happened. Herod was the one who John had arrested and bound in who had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, whom he had married. Ugh. Gross, right? I mean, I guess it's, destiny that Herod would marry Herodias. But she was already married to his brother Philip. Ooh, gross. Just, ugh. John had said to Herod, It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. It's a good law. Herodias harbored a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but was unable to do so. Herod feared John, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man, and kept him in custody. When he heard him speak, he was very much perplexed, yet he liked to listen to him. She had an opportunity one day when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers, his military officers, and the leading men of Galilee. Herodias' own daughter came in and performed a dance that delighted Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, Ask of me whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you. He even swore many things to her. I will grant you whatever you ask of me, even to half of my kingdom. That sounds like a man who's a little bit inebriated at the moment. He's probably drunk. She went out and said to her mother, What shall I ask for? She replied, The head of John the Baptist. Dun dun dun. The girl hurried back to the king's presence and made her request. I want you to give me at once, on a platter, the head of John the Baptist. The king was deeply distressed, but because of his oaths and the guests, he did not wish to break his word to her. So he promptly dispatched an executioner with orders to bring back his head. He went off and beheaded him in the prison. He brought in the head on the platter and gave it to the girl. The girl, in turn, gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The return of the 12. The apostles, so remember, Jesus had sent them out right before this story, and now they come back. The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. He said to them, Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. Now we get the story of the feeding of the 5,000. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. So here's our first analogy, as far as I remember, of sheep and shepherds. Of course, Jesus will reveal in John's gospel that he is the good shepherd. By now it was already late, and his disciples approached him and said, This is a deserted place, and it is already very late. Dismiss them so that they can go to the surrounding farms and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Thinking very practically, that's, of course, we want them to be able to eat. He said to them in reply, Give them some food yourselves. That seems like a very direct and, yikes, did we bring enough food for 5,000 people? Andrew, did you bring enough food for 5,000 people? Nope. But they said to him, Are we to buy 200 days' wages worth of food and give it to them to eat? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 loaves and 2 fish. So he gave orders to have them sit down in groups on the green grass. The people took their places and rose by hundreds and by fifties. Then, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. By the way, what I just read, does that sound familiar? He said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you." Right? We hear those words at Mass. He's going to repeat those words at the Last Supper. And that's why it's brought into the Mass. So Jesus is already starting to foreshadow the Eucharist and how God will bless and multiply the blessings of the Eucharist. They all ate and were satisfied. And they picked up 12 wicker baskets full of fragments and what was left of the fish. All right, remember that word, the number 12, right? It's one of those symbolic numbers. Now, of course, they did pick up 12 wicker baskets, but there's a symbolism even in the 12, right? It's the number of fullness, completeness, right? We have the 12 tribes of Israel, we have the 12 disciples, or the 12 apostles, and so this is a symbolic number here. Those who ate of the loaves were 5,000 men. Are we noticing a trend, by the way, in how Mark is organizing his gospel? First, we had a bunch of healings in a row. We had a bunch of teachings in a row. And now we've got a bunch of mighty works of God in a row. We see a multiplication of the loaves. And now Jesus is going to walk on the water. So Mark really is good at just organizing all the different aspects of Jesus' ministry together. Did they happen in this order? Probably not because of that, right? It's probably scattered throughout his entire ministry. But he gathers them and organizes them in this way. It's important. At least for me. That's what I like about that. Then he made his disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side toward Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And when they had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. Right? Remember that vertical prayer, him and God? When it was evening, the boat was far out on the sea, and he was alone on the shore. Then he saw that they were tossed about while rowing, for the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost. I love this story for a multitude of reasons. The first being he sends them out to the other side first, and he's going to go pray by himself, and he'll meet them there. There's a storm that comes up, and he just casually means to pass by them by walking. You can imagine the disciples in the boat, struggling to keep the boat, 1, afloat, and 2, moving in the right direction, and yet Jesus, there he is. He's just walking by like no big deal. Okay, bye, Jesus. And just these little moments I think are hilarious. And of course, they're not hilarious to them in the moment, but I imagine afterwards they were laughing about it. Remember when Jesus was going to beat us to the other side, walking on the water? When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. They had all seen him and were terrified, but at once he spoke with them. "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." He got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely astounded. They had not understood the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened. Ooh, we've heard that before, right? Their hearts were hardened. Where have we heard that before? Anybody remember? Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Does that mean God hardened their hearts? No. All right, and here it doesn't say God hardened their hearts. Their hearts were hardened. They didn't see what God was actually trying to do. We're going to do this walking on the water is a better account in another gospel. We'll dive into it more there as well. All right, let's go to the next chapter. Oh, there's a lot of notes in this one. Chapter 7, Tradition of the Elders. Here's a good example in this section of Mark teaching a Gentile audience the ways of the Jews, right? Now, when the Pharisees with some scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. In verse 3 and 4 here, he's really explaining it. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed. The purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. So the Pharisees say, hey, you guys don't wash your hands before eating, which in our generation would be like, yeah, because that's gross. Obviously, they didn't know about germs. They didn't know about getting diseases or getting sick with unwashed hands. They didn't know any of that. They did what God told them to do. And Jesus really calls them out here in this moment. He says, well did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts. Basically saying, yeah, you do all the things that God tells you to do, but your hearts, man, they're far from God. You don't actually care about God so much. You care about following the law, and that's not good. You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition. How well you have set aside the commandment of God in order to uphold your tradition. So really, their God became the tradition. Their God became their identity instead of God himself. Their identity pointing to God. All right, we're going to keep going down. Oh, and this is a good segment too, right? So nothing that enters one from outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile. So a lot of the Jewish law center about what can you eat, what can you bring into your body. That's the stuff that defiles you. If you touch a dead body, that defiles you. If you eat pig, right, that's against the kosher laws, and so that would defile you. Jesus is saying, no, what comes from the heart, right? What comes out, the words you say, the actions you do, that really shows where your heart really is. It's not what you bring in, but it's what comes out. And here, he said to them, are you likewise without understanding? Do you not realize that everything that goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and passes out into the latrine? Thus he declared all foods clean. That is an important moment, because we'll see as Christianity takes hold, the question for the Jews is, do we still have to observe Jewish laws? And especially with kosher laws, this is why Christians don't follow the kosher laws, because Jesus here in this moment declares all foods clean. And God will do that again with Peter. They didn't really get it here either. Peter, when we get to the Acts of the Apostles, we'll see God directly telling Peter, no, foods are clean. Those are all a preparation for the food of life, right? The bread of life, the Eucharist. The Syrophoenician's woman faith. From that place he went off to the district of Tyre. Again, we're in pagan territory. He entered a house and wanted no one to know about it, but he could not escape notice. Soon a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. This woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to drive the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. Did Jesus just call her a dog? Kind of looks like it, right? Not quite. That's not exactly what's happening here. So first he says, let the children be fed first. What he's saying is his mission is for the Jews. He is here first and foremost to preach to the Jews and to show the Jews he is the Messiah. But he does kind of seem like he says something pretty derogatory, right? It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to people who are not Jews, right? What he's doing here is he's trying to do what he's doing a lot, and it's call on the woman's faith. What does her faith look like? And here's what she responds. She replied to him and said to him, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps. She's basically saying, I'll take whatever you can give me. I don't care that I'm not Jewish. I don't care. I'll take whatever you give. Then he said to her, for saying this you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. When the woman went home, she found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. I think it's a great story about faith, right? Even when Jesus challenges her faith and says, do you really believe this? She says, yes. I'll take whatever you can give me, Lord. And then he did it. Notice how he does it too, right? So he heals and he exercises in so many different ways. He lays on hands. He says something. In one gospel, we'll see that Jesus will spit in a dude's eye, right? We'll see that. And it's pretty, there's so many different ways. Sometimes he'll just say a word, and this time he just says it's going to happen. He doesn't even say a word. He just says, for saying this you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. He never said anything. So God is in control. He has ultimate power. Healing of the deaf man. Oh, here we go. We're going to see spitting right away. Again, he left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. Remember, the Decapolis is where the man with the demon in yesterday's lecture went. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears, and spitting touched his tongue. Gross. That certainly is not... That'd be weird in modern times, too. but especially in our quarantine COVID times, right? Don't do that. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, Ephata, that is, be opened. And I like that Mark includes that too here. The actual word Jesus said. And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, he has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. So remember, the people of the Decapolis, they were afraid at first, but after the man came to them and said, and started to preach to them and show what Jesus had done, they were amazed. And now, when he comes back, they're more open to receiving Jesus. And they bring to him a deaf man, they see the work he did, and now they were exceedingly astonished and said, he has done all things well. He brings the people to himself. All right, chapter 8, feeding of the 4,000. We have another story of the feeding of many people. Oh, the demand for a sign. The Pharisees came forward and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Have we not seen a whole bunch of signs already? They want more? They do. They want to test him. He sighed from the depths of his spirit. Oh, meditate on that for a moment, right? He sighed from the depth of his spirit. What is that like, sighing from the depth of your spirit, right? Every time the Lions lose, I sigh from the depth of my spirit. No, that's actually not true. I don't care. He says, why does this generation seek a sign? Amen, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. Then he left them, got into the boat again, and went off to the other shore. I think the Pharisees wanted to control Jesus. Do a sign right here and right now. Come on. They're like poking Jesus. Come on, do the thing. Do the thing. Show us. Jesus is like, man, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to be a magician to show you cool things. I'm here to bring your hearts to God. That's what matters. I'm not gonna impress you with my power. I want your heart. And so he leaves them empty because their hearts aren't in the right place. Blind man. Let's see. This is a cool story. Quick. When they arrived at Bethsaida, they brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Putting spittle in his eyes, he laid hands on him and asked, do you see anything? Now notice, this very much parallels the deaf man, right? So he takes the blind man, he leads him outside the village, he takes him off by himself. Instead of putting his finger in his ears and spitting on his tongue, he put spittle in his eyes and laid his hands on him and asked, do you see anything? Looking up, he replied, I see people looking like trees and walking. Well, there weren't a bunch of Ents around, so Jesus lays hands on him a second time, and he saw clearly. His sight was restored, and he could see everything distinctly. Then he sent him home and said, do not even go into the village. Ooh, right? So 2 parallel stories, blind, deaf. We've heard a few times already the phrase, he who has ears ought to hear, right? And oftentimes when we see blindness and deafness in the scriptures, we're not just talking on the literal level, but we're also diving deeper into that spiritual level. Are we spiritually blind? Are we spiritually deaf? The people who are physically blind and deaf, they come to Jesus and they say, Lord, save us. Lord, heal us. They are physically blind and physically deaf, but they are not spiritually blind or deaf. They recognize who Jesus is. They can see him even though they can't physically see. They hear his words even though they can't physically hear. On the flip side, the Pharisees, they physically can see, they physically can hear, but they don't spiritually see or hear Jesus. They ignore him. They are against him. And so this difference between sight, hearing, and spiritual and physical is very important in the Gospels. Third section, the mystery begins to be revealed. Act 3. Now Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Along the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? There's that phrase, right? Who do people say that I am? The identity of Jesus is paramount in his gospel. They said in reply, John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others, one of the prophets. So kind of, again, that same list that we saw with Herod, right? And John the Baptist. He asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter said to him in reply, "You are the Messiah." This is the first time we see that confession from the apostles. And Peter is the one who stands up and says, "You are the Messiah." Remember, Peter is Simon, one of the first disciples we meet. How did the name switch? We're going to see that in another gospel. This is a very important moment in the gospels, and we're going to see this in other gospels where it's, in fact, the hinge moment of the gospels. This is the hinge. This is where everything starts to turn now. So we've seen this man who's done amazing things. We're trying to figure out who he is. This is where everything starts to change. It's the hinge moment. The first prediction of the passion, right? So even everything is now starting to move into the passion of Jesus, his death on the cross. We're at 20 minutes, so this will probably be a good time to... No, I'm going to do this 3 verses, then we'll finish for the day. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and rise after 3 days. So there's elders, chief priests, scribes. We see all of those groups mentioned there. He's going to be killed and rise after 3 days. So he really explicitly tells them this is what's going to happen. He spoke this openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. At this, he turned around, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." Calls him Satan? Oof, right? But again, Peter just said, "You are the Messiah." And then Peter turns around and says, "Oh, but this can't happen. It's not going to happen this way. Don't worry about that." As if he's almost going back on this idea that he is the Messiah. Right? So he's really, again, trying to pull that faith out of Peter and say, "Peter, this is who I am. Like, remember that. Don't forget that." All right, so remember there's a Go Formative due. It'll be due Tuesday at 8 a.m. And have a fantastic weekend. Have a fantastic Martin Luther King Day on Monday. And I will see you all in person on Tuesday.